Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be talking about a few bands. I'm going to be talking about the Stompers and Rollins and the Amplifier Heads and the Peppermint Kicks. These are bands that are fronted by a great singer-songwriter by the name of SAL Baglio. Now, I got into the Stompers because back then, back in the early 80s, I would buy any record where the band had "the" in front of the name, because I knew it'd be either power pop, new wave, post punk, something interesting, because I was always looking for music. And I stumbled across the Stompers. Now, the first Stompers album I bought, I was already late to the party because the band had been around for like 4 years and had put out some independent singles. But their debut album, self-titled, came out in 1983. And I fell in love with it. It was like a mixture of 50s and 60s rock and roll with sort of an 80s sheen to it. I'm not saying that they sounded like Springsteen or whatever, but they seemed to sort of mine those same kind of bands. There was the Phil Spectors and the Chuck Berrys and all these great classic rock and roll artists sort of leaked into the sound of the Stompers. Now, they were absolutely fantastic. Self-titled album came out in 1983. The label shut down, I believe, that year, and then the album got picked up for re-release in 1984. But instead of just re-releasing the album, they changed the cover, they changed the title of the album to One Heart for Sale. They took off a song or two, added a song or two, and out came the second version of the album, which was just as great. This CD represents the recordings on those albums. The only song that is not featured on CD from either of those albums is a song called I Can't Sleep at Night, but I think that's because maybe the band didn't write it or something. But there's all the material there. Now, after 83, 84, I was only able to find like maybe one Stomper 7-inch single that had been released prior to those albums. Now, in 1990, they released another album called Unfinished Business. Now, the thing about this album is I don't even believe it made it to the West Coast. It was an independent release. And since they're a Boston-based band, it was more of an East Coast thing. So I never really even got a hold of this for a couple of years after that. But then a couple of years later, out comes this great collection called the Stompers record album, which contains tracks from that first album I showed you and some of the early recordings from like the late 70s and early 80s, which are far more rock and roll, far more raw, and just hook-filled and melodic. And that's definitely a CD to track down. I would say this is the best of their early recordings up through their debut album. Now, I'm not a big fan of live recordings, but I'm a big fan of the Stompers and hearing that live energy that I never experienced because as far as I know, they never made it to the West Coast. So this is a great little collection. It's a live scrapbook. And it's filled with great songs, and you definitely have to check that out. Now, these two albums that I told you about, the self-titled and Unfinished Business, the majority of those albums were compiled onto this Stompilation. So if you're not able to get a hold of those other two, this is a great stopgap, something so you can hear this great, wonderful music. There's also White Lightning and Cold Cuts, which contains a live show, and it contains some previously unreleased material as well. Now, the Stompers had ceased recording, but they still every year play live shows. They're a big draw in Boston. In fact, this year, 2021, is essentially the end of the Stompers. They're playing their final shows, which is heartbreaking because I would always hope that maybe one day I'd be able to catch their live show. Doesn't look like it's going to happen, but they've been doing it a long time, over 40 years. Now, Sal Baglio, the lead singer-songwriter, didn't stop recording. He actually continued under a couple different guises. Now, he went under the pseudonym Rollins. This is great alternative rock, still with those 50s and 60s flavorings to it. A bunch of great songs, very energetic, different from the Stompers, but still great melodic music, really full of energy. And he just a great songwriter, continued to be a great songwriter, but he was working on a different plane. Now, in 2005, Rollins released a second album called Super Heterodyne, and this is a completely different beast. It's still great. It still has that raw modern rock and roll sound, but he's far more experimental. It does go into acoustic, and it's just so many different sounds going on. The songwriting's still great, but it seems far more personal, and it's really, really a fine record. So you need to track that down. Now, he released a couple albums under his name, Salvatore Baglio, but I don't know if they ever came out on CD. I've asked him a few times, and I don't know if he's ever answered me directly, but they are available digitally. And again, those are very intimate, some of it haunting, some of it sad, some of it joyful, really, really wonderful stuff. But like I said, 2 albums that are available digitally, so I won't really talk too much about him, but you should definitely check it out because he's such a talented artist. Anyway, he returned in 2019 as the Amplifier Heads. This album is called Louda, and boy, is it loud. It is just, it's power pop, it's rock and roll, it's everything rolled into one. It's punchy, it's in your face, great tunes. It's like a mountain of music just falling over on top of you, but it's really, really, really fun to listen to. Again, different from the Stompers, different from Rollins, different from his solo material, but it's punchy, big, and beautiful. And typical of Sal Baglio, the next Amplifier Heads, which is called Music for Abandoned Amusement Parks, came out in 2020. This is a completely different beast. Still wonderful songs. This was written and recorded like right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's haunting. It feels like that positive energy that Louda had just gave way to this, oh my gosh, what's going on with the world? And it's sometimes sad, it's haunting, it's beautiful, it's punchy, but it's not that mountain of rock and roll that Louda was. It's more introspective, and it's really a touching album, sometimes kind of spooky too, but wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Sal Baglio returned with another Amplifier Heads album this year, and it's called Saturnalians. And this thing is mind-blowingly weird and wonderful. It's got that power of the first album, but it's also got a lot of the experimentation and sadness and introspection of the second album. And you're looking at this and you're going, oh, it's a new prog rock thing. No, it's not. It literally feels like it takes you to the moon. Like the lead vocals on the first couple tracks sound like, you're hearing them inside an astronaut's helmet. And by the time the album ends, it's like the band is playing live on the moon. I mean, I'm not saying that this is actually happening. It's like a musical journey, and you end up feeling just great after it. But see, this isn't all that he's recorded, because like a few months before this album came out, he was in a band called the Peppermint Kicks with Dan Kopko. It's just a great pop album. It's not Stompers, it's not Amplifier Heads, but it's great, rough, in your face pop music. It's got rough edges and a shiny sheen at the same time. And it's really absolutely a great little record. It's really fun. You got to check it out. And that is it. I've gone through Sal Baglio's career in just a matter of minutes, from the Stompers to Rollins to Salvatore Baglio to the Amplifier Heads to the Peppermint Kicks. And it's all worth your while. It's wonderful. It's inspiring. And it's music you need to check out as soon as possible. As a matter of fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to provide you with a short medley of just some of the songs from some of these albums. I'm not going to cover all the albums, but I'm going to give you an idea of what to expect when you start going out and purchasing your Sal Baglio collection, featuring the Stompers, Amplifier Heads, Peppermint Kicks, and Rollins and his solo recordings. So sit back and have a listen.
Have fun. Summer girls lying in the sun. It's crazy, but the train to Liverpool, I fell into a woozy sleep. Perfect fare with rain and jewels, poppins and a chimney sweep. On the train to Liverpool. Jim, Jim, Jiminy, Jim, Jeree. Jim, Jim, Jiminy, Jim, Jeroo. Jim, Jim, Jiminy, Jim, Jeree. The boy with the amplifier head. Everybody thought that he was born that way. When they shut him down, he made that awful sound. The boy with the amplifier head. Down, come on, the down, come on, the down, come on, the down, come on, the blue jeans and a corduroy jacket, blue jeans and a corduroy jacket. All the things you keep and throw away, divided by the words that you say, multiplied by dreams of those who've stayed at the house of young dolls. My memories turn into wonder why cannot be. I never forget sweet strawberry, never forget those strawberry girls. Ain't them cats the most? Ain't them cats the most? I'm just a real and rockin'. Yeah, 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 my baby. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'll praise your bastards and give them a toast.
Anyway, that's it. Thank you for allowing me to talk about the Stompers and Peppermint Kicks and Amplifier Heads and all these other great bands featuring the magical musical touch of Mr. Sal Baglio. I really appreciate your time. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, ring that bell for future notifications. Remember to leave a comment. And until the next time, remember me. I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.